Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Ryan Weaver, and I'll be going over your spinal workshop this evening titled Half Hour to Health. We've really knocked this down a little bit to be about 10 minutes actually, because I like to keep things straight to the point so that you at home or driving home from work or anywhere, if you have a short little break, that you can tune in and learn something educational. Tonight's workshop, we are going to really look at how our body and how our spine are created, why it is so, but how often we forget to even take care of the most important organ in our body. So, tonight's health topic, we're going to be discussing our central nervous system, because a lot of people have no idea when they claim quote-unquote chiropractors help with back pain. Well, we actually look more to the neurology of this and into our nervous system, so our brain and our spinal cord. Most people have heard of a pinched nerve before. A word that is commonly used, especially in our office, is a subluxation, where we can get abnormal pressure against the nerve causing a symptom, whether that's pain, numbness, tingling, or the like. So we're going to reference a few studies that prove that it is actually a real thing, where they thought that it really wasn't. But before we get into that, do me a favor, and if you're on YouTube or on Facebook, hit subscribe. That way that any information that we provide or send out, fun health topics, fun spinal workshops, new and old, that way you can always be notified when we have those. So typically I draw this out, but when we look at our central nervous system, what is that? When you simply think of what the words describe, central nervous system, sounds like a pretty important thing. Maybe like NASA headquarters. That's made up of your brain and your spinal cord. It's a very, very delicate thing. Think of how easy it is to have a concussion. Or if you injure your spinal cord, it's a really big deal. But how often in traditional healthcare and normal wellness checks do we even think about checking it? Now I'm going to go through some vital vital checks that are often examined, yet how other things more important are often missed. So, for example, one of the most important things about our nervous system is it's the first to develop in a woman's womb. That typically happens about day 14, day 28. Our notochords develop, and everything starts stemming from that completely. Our nervous system even becomes covered in bone. Our brain and our spinal cord are the only things that are fully covered and wrapped in this armor. So it must be pretty important. And you're going to hear the trend of this is, yet how often do we think of taking care of it? You know, all of our organs that sit inside of our rib cage and our stomach, our liver, our spleen, our kidneys, everything is really easily accessed just under our rib cage, and even our ribs, which are super easy to fracture even. But it's pretty tough to get through this thing. But as I said, how often do we think of taking care of it? And maybe you are one of those individuals who, well, I don't know, if I don't have back pain or headaches or neck pain, what good can a chiropractor do? Well, oftentimes it's because we haven't been educated enough to understand what exactly a chiropractor does or how adjustments help our body to become overall healthier. So, the example that I always bring up here is if you think of Superman. There was an injury that he sustained, and he injured his cervical spine, became paralyzed. You know, I bring this up a lot is in first aid and CPR, one of the first things when you arrive on the scene, besides, you know, checking the scene and those things with the person, is you don't immediately start moving them unless there is life-threatening like fire or moving vehicles or something like that, because you suspect an injury to the spine. But in most wellness checks, at least that my patients tell me, Well, when I walk in, they're going to take my height and my weight, check my eyes, ears, nose, throat, check my blood pressure, check my pulse ox, heart rate, listen to your lungs, listen to your heart, maybe take some blood, maybe palpate your abdomen. But how often do we ever check this or reflexes? And for myself, I can remember, I believe 6th grade, you bent down, touch your toes, make sure you didn't have scoliosis, and that's really it. And look how many of us end up with other problems down the road. And of course, yes, lower back pain is a big one. Headaches, neck pain are other big ones. I talk about this a lot in our work, manual labor industries, construction, safety council meetings and things like that. That gets brought up a lot. How do we avoid workplace injuries? Again, taking care of this early on helps us to avoid those other things and other injuries, So, thinking of our spine a little differently here as well. Well, there's a lot of segments here, which means it's easy to move and bend. It means we're flexible and can move and bend. But the bad part about it is that puts our disc and our nerves very at risk for injury. So, we want to make sure that it is taken care of because it can be injured easily. All right? So, subluxation, Dr. Sue at the University of Colorado did a study because there was, quote unquote, from the medical profession, no evidence or scientific evidence to prove that a subluxation was a real thing. And what they found is 5 minutes of about the pressure of a dime on a nerve can decrease nerve function by 60%. So if that's just 5 minutes, what happens if something's misaligned for a week, months, years? And the bad thing is we don't always immediately have a pain or a symptom. So we can neglect that and we can push it off and push it off and push it off, and then we end up, oh my gosh, I bent down to pick up a pen and I threw my back out. I hear this a lot. Those are things that could have been prevented a long time ago. And I think that's the trend that we're starting to see. Is I see younger and younger people coming into our office to get things checked out because there's nothing wrong with just knowing, We often hear of diseases. Well, let's really break this down. And, before a disease becomes a disease, if you break that apart, dis-ease, meaning a lack of ease, our body's not at ease. But prior to that, usually it's just a dysfunction. It's not normal. Headaches are not normal. They're very common, but they're not a normal thing. A short amount of time can lead to a dysfunction. Maybe that's what we have first. If that continues to evolve, then we can end up with disease. Our body is not at its equilibrium. It's lack of coordination. We're at a state of out of balance. Things aren't working the way they should, and then we continue to neglect it. Now we end up with a disease process. Maybe even something such as degenerative joint disease or disc disease. Those are things, yeah, you typically hear it with age, but I've also seen a lot of older folks who don't have that if they've properly taken care of their body and spine. So, we spend a tremendous amount of money on healthcare. Even with some of our workshops, we've talked about, insurance. We've talked about chiropractic care. We talk about how do you avoid unnecessary fees and how do you actually take care of your body for the long run in a healthy regard, not just, oh my gosh, our building's on fire, how do we put the fire out in terms of pain? So, in 2015, $3.3 trillion, $10,000 per person was spent on health care. 50% of all pharmaceutical costs, by the way, are from the U.S. We are 33rd in the world health rankings. I wouldn't be surprised if we even dropped further than that. So what's my point in going through this? What's my point in just sharing a few brief things about our spine, how it was created, what's a subluxation, a few things on healthcare and cost? Is because when we take care of this in terms of our vital needs, if you were to think about it, well, what's our vital needs? Well, what do we need to survive? Well, we got to have food. Well, how long can we go without food? We can typically go weeks without food. Not that I recommend that, but we could. Well, with food, water, which is typically about 3 days, we can go without that. What about oxygen and blood? Well, blood helps transport oxygen. Blood's definitely important. Oxygen is definitely important. After 4 minutes, we can start having some cognitive decline if we don't have oxygen to our brain. So super important. But what about if our spine, specifically our spinal cord, our nerve is injured or cut, or the same thing to our brain? It's instantaneous. But once again, we never think of taking care of this. I bring up football a lot. You don't immediately, an injured player's on the field, we don't immediately just go up and grab them by the collar and yank them off the field because we suspect, again, a spinal injury. So my hope for you is this made you just think of that a little differently. Or, hey, you know what, why don't I give a call to a chiropractor, have my spine checked, even if I don't have symptoms, because the sad reality, there are people who have diseases, cancers, things, and they have no symptoms, have no idea they have it. Or maybe it's just a little one that gets dismissed. And you could have saved a life earlier. You could have helped have a better quality of life earlier. Again, I say God made a really good system. But we also, especially as Americans, find a lot of ways to mess it all up. So my hope is that it's a call to action to make a phone call. There's no harm in having your spine checked. If not that, at least think of this differently and, hey, how could I better my health? So I appreciate you being on here. I hope this was just a little flash into what we do here in Apex Spinal Performance with chiropractic care, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next spinal workshop. Thanks, everybody.